Welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. As you may or may not know, my name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. And a lot of people are engaging and developing their folks online these days, and DISC is a great tool for that. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, an inclusive mastermind community of over 24 or 2,500 HR professionals in 10 different licensed chapters around the country. And so if you are an HR pro or you serve HR pros in any way, I would love for you to find out more about what we are doing, all for free and all virtually these days, at hrhotseat.com. You are here today for what I affectionately call a Harmony Insights lunch date. And that is an opportunity for me to connect with somebody who really inspires me during 30 minutes of my lunch here in the Central Time Zone, so that I can go about my afternoon eager and inspired to do my best work. And today's guest is my friend Claire Petrie. Claire, welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date.
Thanks, Eric. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. Without further ado, Claire Petrie, president of Claire Petrie HR and Training, among other things. Claire, I'm really excited for you and I to have this chance to talk today.
I'm really excited too. I love talking about just showing up on social media and how it's helped me and the benefits for others. So,
and that I came to you and said, Claire, what are you most passionate? I didn't lead you in any way. Honestly, I said, what are you most passionate about these days? And you said, let's have a talk titled something to the effect of the how and why of both LinkedIn and Twitter. Before we even get to that, I like starting out by asking my guests how they have been impacted by COVID-19. We all have been to some extent in terms of health or economy or profession. If you're willing to share, how have you been impacted by what's going on these days?
Yeah, no problem. So my normal day job is a talent acquisition manager for Unifrax. We're a ceramic fiber development and manufacturing company headquartered in Buffalo. So we have a bunch of different business units, one of our main ones being consumer automotive. So that's really tanked during this time. We do emission control products primarily for consumer automotive, but our ceramic fiber products also go into filtration and insulation and other things that have been deemed essential, luckily. So that part of the business is keeping us afloat. But we've been through a lot of layoffs, a lot of furloughs. My HR team right now is on a 25% rotating furlough. So we each have 1 week off a month. And then we cover, for each other when the other people are off on their weeks. So yeah, it's been a little different.
Yeah.
But we're, covering for each other and trying to stay positive and help our employees get through it. So
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I'll be interested if it gets incorporated into our conversation, the extent to which your work as a talent acquisition practitioner has been impacted specifically, because you hear so much these days about how nobody's hiring. I know that isn't true across the board. There are some companies and industries that are doing really well, and I know jobs are still available, but maybe we can include that in our conversation today. If you wouldn't mind, just briefly, you already mentioned your practitioner role as a talent acquisition, senior manager of global talent acquisition operations, as LinkedIn says.
It's a long title. I just say TA manager. It's easier.
But I know you have your own company as well. So can you give us a sense, what positions you well today for this conversation, given what you pursue professionally? To talk with us today, share your tips and tricks, and talk through challenges related to how we connect with each other professionally on platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter.
Yeah, so I love to come at it from, kind of two different angles. One, obviously, being I've kind of grown up in my professional career using LinkedIn because I have been in a lot of recruitment roles. But personally, too, I love to help people who are in transition or maybe just looking to do something completely different, and how to just position themselves, online for that next opportunity so they can be findable and visible. And especially now in this time when we can't go to in-person networking events, that's been really hard for me. I'm like a shriveling extrovert sometimes, but I live for these types of calls for all of you where I can see people. So LinkedIn and Twitter are just great tools to keep the networking going. So for Claire Petrie HR and Training, that side hustle just kind of came to be from me sharing what I've learned on how to use social to help my career. Obviously, I'm not a marketing or branding person by background, but I use my background in helping people job search and incorporate that with how to show up on LinkedIn. I geek out on how the algorithm works. So that, I don't know, that just interests me.
You've already said the magic word algorithm, so we're going to get to that. That, trust me, that has not
Yeah.
come up in any of my lunch dates so far. So
Oh,
this
it's
will be
fun.
unique. You
Hmm.
mentioned, I love how you describe yourself. I think you said a shriveling extrovert. Can you just mention just briefly what you meant by that?
Yeah, I just feel like just being behind a screen is really hard because I am like a hugger, and I just like to be close to people when we're chatting and stuff. So it's hard, it's just kind of interesting to be behind the screen. But I love when folks do keep their video on, like you said, because it's just so much more conversational and it makes my day to just see other happy faces.
Yeah.
Keeps me going.
We have at least one attendee who's chimed in that her video is off because she's eating lunch, which is perfectly acceptable.
I
Although
saw
we
that,
wouldn't mind.
Kai.
Actually, I'd be inspired to know what she's eating, but
No
um,
worries.
we'll be okay with that. And I should actually point out that we have a number of friends in common, professional acquaintances and friends, and I think that's one of the things that brought us together. But I almost primarily know you as somebody who really navigates social media very well. I know you through platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter. And
Yeah.
what I've told people is, a lot of my guests who have come on, we've had a number of conversations. We may have even met in person. I knew who you were, and then I accosted you at the top of an escalator at Sherm 19 in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
You were talking with someone else. I walked up and I introduced myself and said, Claire, I know who you are. You probably don't know who I am. And I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to say hi. And that really has been the extent of our conversation so far.
Yeah.
But I feel like I know you better than that. And I think that really comes back to the power of social media and how well you have used platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Before we get any further, I want to put up a quick poll that I've put together. 2 questions this time. I've usually only ever done one. But the 2 questions that I've chosen for today are, number 1, do you currently use LinkedIn and or Twitter to grow your professional network and presence? So you can use it for a couple of different reasons. It's certainly not for sharing pictures of cats, as I understand it, but rather growing your professional network. And then 2, if you answered yes to question 1, which platform have you found to be the most effective for growing your professional network and presence? I know where I lean, but I'm really curious to see. I'm already fascinated by some of the numbers that are coming in, so we'll leave that up for a little bit to allow people to respond. Why have you specifically singled out LinkedIn and Twitter among all available social media platforms for this conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess they're just the two I feel most comfortable with using in general, but the quick story I always love to share is that in 2017, I took on my first HR DOO Department of One role, and I had 300 hourly associates, and I just personally had that need for more connection and more learning. I just felt like I was really out on an island, and I turned to Twitter, and at the time I just used it like as my personal account. And I asked, I can't remember what I asked now exactly, but it was some employee relations issue I remember. And Paul and Keith Enox both replied to that tweet, and they introduced me to NextChat and just some of the other engaged HR pros on Twitter that I was like, I can't even believe this exists. I didn't know HR people used Twitter.
That they were
So all
technically proficient.
Yeah, I mean, well, since then I've talked to a lot of my local network to understand like if they use it, like why or why not. And some of the feedback I get is that there's a lot of pressure sometimes as HR people to be like representing, your company, when you're online, and they're just not sure how to use it for themselves. And that's what my thought was too. I didn't use Twitter professionally at the time. I only used LinkedIn because I just didn't know HR people were using it. So
Yeah.
I've learned a lot since then, and I just decided to keep up being active throughout 2017. And that's how Sherm reached out to me to be on the blog squad, which I thought was something that would never happen to me. So that's why I'm just so passionate about it too, because sharing kind of what opportunities you can be found for if you're online, it's like it's
Yeah.
endless sometimes.
That's where that exposure piece comes in. I think we naturally say, oh yeah, I understand LinkedIn and Twitter for having a platform to make my voice heard, getting out there and uh, and connecting and building my network. But I think at least for me, secondary to building my network, which is how I see of these things, is also, wait a minute, there's that exposure piece of it, that I can be found in some way. I don't have to necessarily be the one doing the finding, but I can be found simply by being present in some effective way on these platforms.
Yeah, exactly. Just from leaving thoughtful comments and just checking your messages a couple times a week and stuff, you can
Yeah.
find amazing relationships and communities there.
So let's right off the bat, let's just agree that you don't have to be a technical guru. You don't have to live your life on these platforms to use them effectively. That even if you're just bouncing in for a couple of minutes a day, there are, I would imagine, some very specific tips that we'll be able to share today that you've brought to help people immediately up their game in terms of how they're using these platforms.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would say just be consistent. So whatever that looks like for you and the time you can allow to it based on your personal situation, whether that's checking things once a week or twice a week. Again, I just feel like being in the recruitment world, I'm on it like all the time. So it's so hard to, I don't know, step away from it, I guess,
Right.
sometimes. But yeah, whatever you're comfortable with, I just say get consistent with it.
So we'll come back to some more specific tips and how we use them. But in a moment, or actually now, not in a moment, I want to end the poll that I put together and share the results. Very interesting. Number one, do you currently use LinkedIn or Twitter to grow your professional network and presence? 100% of our attendees said yes, which is fantastic. I love it. Had anyone said no, I would have wanted to find out exactly who that person was and have a conversation with them. But everybody said yes. Number two, and this is interesting to me as well, if you do use them, which platform have you found to be the most effective? I think I assumed that it would lean toward LinkedIn, as it does. 69% of the audience has said LinkedIn, and I think you think of professional networking connection via LinkedIn, that LinkedIn is the platform for professional networking. But we have, maybe the slight surprise to me is that we have as many as 31% of our attendees saying that they actually prefer Twitter to LinkedIn for that professional connection. Are you seeing similar engagement in your own circles? Do you find that a good number of people are preferring Twitter to LinkedIn these days, Claire?
It's so hard to decide. I mean, the poll popped up for me, so obviously I did it too. I wanted to kind of do it half and half, even though that wasn't an option. But yeah, I think they're just used so differently. Twitter, I feel like I can just be more vulnerable because more like back and forth conversations are happening. And LinkedIn, I use more to kind of share the industry related news. And, I think there's more LinkedIn, there's more like posting and not as much sometimes two-way conversation, I guess, as there is for Twitter.
Yeah. We already have some people who are weighing in on the chat, going back and forth about where they work and various affiliations. I would encourage you to drop your LinkedIn URL there if you want. People have found that that's an easy way to connect with one another, is just drop your LinkedIn URL, maybe even your Twitter handle, into that chat area. And here's a tip for those of you who aren't familiar, and I come across a number of people who are actually very active on LinkedIn that aren't familiar with this. You can customize your URL. So just naturally, LinkedIn is going to add digits at the end, numbers and letters at the end of your link. You can go in and customize that, take out those things. And as long as you're not choosing something that's already being used, you can simplify your LinkedIn URL to make it easier to share with people on a resume and a business card, and in situations like this as well. So let's start with LinkedIn, Claire. What are some of the challenges that you feel people are faced with in general around how they're using LinkedIn, or maybe even especially today, if there's anything specific to what we're dealing with the coronavirus? But what are some of the challenges that you've identified and experienced around using LinkedIn as a professional networking platform?
Yeah, so what I've experienced, because again, I've only used it like for my like personal sharing within the last few years. I had it since like 2012 LinkedIn, but I was just connecting with, people I worked with in alma mater and things like that. So I got comfortable kind of finding my voice and stuff on Twitter first. And then when I took that to LinkedIn, that's definitely one of the first challenges I've had, and what I've heard from other professionals as well, is just finding your voice. So it's hard to just hit send sometimes on that first post or that first message to a recruiter. So I'd love to work with people on that. If you're going to send a connection request note and you're just not sure is this something I would send, or is this a post that's appropriate for LinkedIn? I'm always happy to kind of chat with them and help word that.
So you're saying there's a
And
bit more deliberation when it comes to LinkedIn in your experience, that you're spending a little bit more time making sure that what you are sending is appropriate in some way.
I think when you're first starting off, it does take a little bit more
Yeah.
deliberation just to learn how people are kind of interacting on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, again, it was trying to figure out what to post again on LinkedIn, like what types of things should go there. So, now I just have a list that I kind of keep handy of industry news or articles or community events. And so you just kind of get comfortable with different things you can post. And then just being not sure how it works, really. That's kind of where my fascination comes in with the algorithm, because I hear a lot of people that say they don't use LinkedIn because their newsfeed has turned into Facebook, and when they post, they don't get any engagement, or people aren't responding to their connection requests and stuff. So I think that's what's really interested me too, is finding out how all those things work so you can make it work for you.
Yeah. Well, then, we've identified then that as a challenge, and whether or not people feel that their posts are being seen. What has worked for you in terms of when you post things to LinkedIn, making sure that it does get seen?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is to know your audience. So I try to connect pretty intentionally for the most part. In my line of work, I've been in manufacturing most of my career. So most of my connections are manufacturing pros, HR pros, or from my alma maters. I always make sure it's something I just ask, is this something that my network is going to care about and be that they'll think is valuable, excuse me.
Mhm.
I always include a call to action. So another just frustration I hear from people, they share a link or a post they think is really valuable, and they want to have a discussion with their network on it, but they didn't ask for that engagement. So I always try to include a question, or what does my network think about this? What would you add? So that we can, start sharing, each other's knowledge in the comments. There's so many other things I could say on that, but for getting started, I think those are just the few things I kind of go through
Yeah.
to set up the structure of the
Being
post.
intentional about who you're trying to speak to, and how you want to engage them, what you want them to do. Maybe is it just an FYI, hey, here's a really cool article that I found, which in itself I think is valuable for branding. I work with a lot of people in job transition, and I say, all right, you're going to spend some of this time, yes, searching for your next opportunity and everything that goes into that, but you're also going to establish who you are, what you're interested in. And simply, even if you're not writing original content of your own and posting on LinkedIn, which is such a valuable way to establish your authority, you can curate information from other people and share. I'm always sharing things that are written much more brilliantly than I could. A friend of ours, Paul Alone, who may be on this conversation today, is the HR philosopher, and he writes about just the most profound things that I couldn't put into words in nearly the same way. And so I'm much better served by sharing what Paul has written. But by virtue of me sharing that, people then come to know me as somebody who's interested in human resources, who might have an opinion about it, who's spending the time curating this content and getting it out there. I don't have to write it myself, but I can still share it, and thereby, build something of a reputation for myself. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And something else I like to talk to the people I work with too is that not to get too hung up on the posting, either. Even if you're just, like you said, viewing other people's articles, leaving a thoughtful comment, not only to boost their post with the algorithm, but to, thank them or generate discussion, or remember that everyone that you're connected to sees what you comment on. So it doesn't always have to be post, to be findable and visible. And that kind of goes back to the curating the newsfeed. I just wanted to mention real quick, because a lot of people are saying it's like not valuable, or it's like Facebook. So I just make sure that I leave thoughtful comments on things in my feed that are helpful, and on things that I just don't use LinkedIn for, or think are inappropriate or don't find value in, I hide them. So you do have to give LinkedIn a little bit of information for them to start,
Yeah.
Making it more relevant for you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I will share that one of my biggest takeaways from LinkedIn is that it is overwhelmingly positive, almost unrealistically so sometimes, but people really are so supportive, or can be so supportive of one another, and very flattering, and almost the opposite of how I experience other social media platforms. Like, for example, when I log into Facebook, I know I'm going to catch up on what my friends are doing, but I'm going to see so much vitriol and anger, and a lot of
Yeah.
that is actually very valid given what's going on in the world today. But when I log into LinkedIn, I know I'm not going to see that stuff. I'm going to see people supporting each other, wanting the best for one another, being enthusiastic about the brands and the products and services that they represent, which then brings us to a point that somebody has dropped into the chat. You have to put up with a lot of salesy pitches from people at times, especially as they're connecting with you. What has been your experience accepting or navigating connection requests on LinkedIn from people who appear to be wanting to sell you something right off the bat?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I always just trust my gut. You can usually tell if there's a connection request, or even if there isn't, just kind of, that you're going to get hit with it when you do hit accept. But I like the way I connect and the way I accept connection requests, are we going to be able to add like mutual value to each other's network? So sometimes I do connect, and then if they hit me with the sales pitch right away, I usually just start with like, I'm glad to have you in my network. I'm looking forward to see what kind of value you add to the platform. Like, I'm happy to follow your content and check it out, to kind of put the onus back on them, kind of like, don't just use this as a sales platform, just how some people use it just for a job searching platform. It's really evolved to the networking relationship kind of platform over the last few years. So I think sometimes when I say things like that to them, they're just like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, let's like follow each other's content and, start to build a professional
Yeah.
relationship. And
And then
they
they
don't really seem
disappear.
that interested. Yeah, because they want to sell. So that says a lot. And then I just kind of don't interact with them. So
It's almost a part of my response template now where I say something at some point about, I'm looking forward to learning from you here. To sort of implying that you're not going to prey on me. That's not what this is about. I'm open to learning from you if you have something valuable to share, but you have to have something valuable to share. One of my greatest tips that I share, and I get some people know that I get very worked up about this, is just, if you do nothing else, start by personalizing every single connection request. Every single one. You can do it on your desktop, you can do it on your phone, you have to do an additional step on your phone. But if you don't personalize your connection request on LinkedIn, you've missed, I think, your greatest opportunity to really leave a very positive first impression. At the very least, give the person some sense of how either they can be of service to you, or preferably vice versa, how you could be of service to them. Just the other day, I received a connection request from a student and who's just figuring out this whole online networking thing, but it was just, he hit the connect button and that was it. And when I responded and said, why is it that you have connected specifically with me, knowing that will allow me to serve you in a better going forward? He said, well, I'm a student and I'm new at this and I'm looking for work. And that would have been so helpful for me to know right up front. But I didn't get any of that. He just hit that connect button. So hitting connect is not a meaningful connection. Personalize that in some way.
Yeah, I agree. Your connection request is much more likely to be accepted as well when you add a note. And I love adding a note too, because you're right, it gives some context, but also when someone accepts your request, you get a notification in your inbox. So it makes it even easier to follow up with them. I've been that person before that's hit connect without adding a note. And then I kept like viewing their profile to see if they accepted me. And I would have just gotten notified in my inbox if I'd added that note.
Jeff has added an interesting comment saying an unfortunate reality about LinkedIn is that people have been hit on, that people are not treating it outright as a dating site, but maybe looking at it that way and thinking, oh, this is an opportunity for me to connect with people in ways that they probably don't want to be connected with. So that's a great comment, Jeff. And I've heard stories of that as well. And just how uncomfortable for anybody to be put in that position, right? So I wanted to make sure we spent the majority of our time talking about LinkedIn, because people were saying that they used it more often. But in the few minutes we have left, if you can believe this, I want to make sure that we touch on Twitter chats. And this is somewhat selfish because I'm hearing so much about it. I know a lot of our attendees are just all over these Twitter chats. Can you give us a sense of what Twitter chats are and how we can become involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I usually share, Wendy Daly has a post on her website of Twitter chats. There's a couple other I like that I add to that list when people ask me what to be involved in. But they're, I would say, usually an hour. there's a moderator posting a question with the hashtag, and then you weigh in with your answer, or you don't have to answer. You can just reply to the other people who are participating. So sometimes I just use it as like a social listening tool. If it's a topic I really don't know a lot about, you can still follow it and learn something from others. But a great way, to network online and make friends that become better friends later on. That's what happened to me a lot from Twitter chats, which I couldn't believe. But great way to just get yourself out there and learn.
And to make sure I understand it, it's not a direct message. It's not like an email or something like that. You're using hashtags as a way to basically keep track of a stream of comments, right? You can use hashtags if you want to be associated with a certain conversation that's going on, or an idea or a topic. And then you can also search by those hashtags then to see the conversation that's happening around that. So it's not like I'm receiving all of these messages in my inbox. They are just all being curated, I guess, in a sense, because we're using sort of a common identifier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like using hashtags on LinkedIn too. You can search hashtags on LinkedIn just like you can on Twitter. You can see if anyone's using them. So you can decide if it's relevant to use in your own post. Works the same way I found on multiple platforms.
Yeah. Oh, I know there's some very popular Twitter chats that go on. People have said that they've met people that way. And I think one of the things that's mind-boggling about both LinkedIn and Twitter is you can develop really meaningful, deep relationships with people that you have never met face to face. And then suddenly a couple years down the road, you're at a conference together for the first time face to face. And it's like you've known each other forever.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I love it so much, because even though I'm an extrovert, going to networking events is still stressful if you don't know anyone. And it's been so fun in my experience to connect with people, ahead of time that are using the same hashtags I am, saying, I hope to see you at this event. And then when they come up to you, when you get there and they recognize you, you can kind of skip all that small talk because they already know where you work. They can see into your personality a little bit from your profile, and you're like fast friends.
Yeah.
So they're such great tools for that purpose, for sure.
Again, very limited on time. What is one of your favorite tips? What is something very actionable that people who walk away from this conversation right now, who want to become more effective at using either LinkedIn or Twitter, what is one of your favorite tips to share with people so that they can make immediate progress?
Yeah, I would say just view your own profile periodically and keep it updated with any new skills that you've learned or courses you've attended, so that people can find you by those keywords. And I recommend too, if you're just getting started, especially on LinkedIn, what I did for myself when I first got started was set a goal for myself of like 5 to 10 intentional connection requests each week, because you could be posting and sharing the best content but not have anyone to see it or interact with you on it. So I think it's important to kind of do both. And then as you're connecting with people, it's a snowball effect. So they'll be posting about books and webinars and podcasts that you can then share and listen to. So by networking, you're going to be learning a lot too.
I love to use the word intentional. I think some people are of the mind that if you just cast a wide net, the wider the net, the better. And whoever you pull in is going to be helpful to you. And I have found the exact opposite to be true, that the more intentional and more specific I am about the connections that I make, the better served I am, and the better served those people are ultimately. And so being intentional, I think, is a great suggestion. Claire, this has been fantastic. I wish we had at least twice as much time. People are going to want to find
Me
you after
too.
this. I guarantee people are going to want to follow up with you and take advantage of what you know about these platforms and your positivity and enthusiasm for life, which comes across very clearly in conversations like this. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I would just say my website, clairepetriehr.com, and then all of my social buttons are right up at the top on the website.
Wonderful. Claire is going to share with me links to resources that she talked about during this conversation. I'm going to be able to follow up with all of you who attended via email, blind copying everybody, of course, with links to those resources so that you can connect with those and with Claire following this conversation. If you need to go about your afternoon at this point, you're welcome to. I'd love for you to stick around. At the very least, if you found this conversation to be valuable, I would love for you to go back to harmonyinsights.com/lunchdates. We have another great conversation coming up tomorrow with John Thurmond, who's one of the co-hosts of the HR Social Hour half-hour podcast. I have a few great conversations lined up next week, and coming up soon, the second ever pop-up panel. I did the first ever pop-up panel last Friday, and the fun part about that is that panelists are chosen in the moment among attendees, people who volunteer and say, I like the topic, this one's going to be on leadership, I would love to be a panelist. I choose 2 or 3 panelists in the moment, and that is the basis for the conversation that we have for that 30 or 45 minutes. So I would love to have you involved with that pop-up panel among other lunch date conversations. Again, if you need to take off, go about your afternoon. I hope that you stay healthy and encouraged, and that this has inspired you to do your best work. And in the meantime, if you want to stick around, Claire is going to stay with us and answer some additional questions. But just once again, Claire, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thanks for having me, Eric. This was fun.